Welcome to On the Road with Angela and Leila. And today we are really excited to be talking about finding your personal calling and by understanding how God made you. And it's a personal passion of both of ours. And so first of all, I want to introduce my friend Leila. We met actually the first time I saw you. You didn't meet me. I watched you as you spoke at the first Women in Ministry conference that I went to in, where was that at? Arizona, in Phoenix. And I just remember when I met you, I was in awe. Like, you were on fire. You're young. You just, the Holy Spirit spoke through you. And I just knew I had to know you. And from that day on, you have been an inspiration through your work, through just your determination to follow God's call on your life. And so I just wanted to say that because now you get to meet all of the women of the Northwest and beyond through Equip Her groups. And so I'm really excited for you to have that opportunity to meet them through this broadcast. And so thank you for taking this time, and very impromptu that I asked you last week to do this because I thought it was such an important topic. And this is something, when we're talking about fivefold ministries today, that you actually shared with me. And so now I'm sharing it with others. And so thank you so much for being with us today.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
So just a little bit, just so for the ladies that are listening, just a little background of where you're at. You're not here in the Pacific Northwest. You're in Colorado, my other favorite place. Maybe you could tell a little bit about your beautiful life and your family and your husband and your kids. I love in your bio how you wrote, I am the mother to 3 of the most precocious, monstrous, perfect little humans on the planet.
Yeah, they are all of the above. That's life. It's wonderful 1 second and why in the world did we do this the next? But so my name is Leila Ojala. Moved up to Summit County, Colorado several years ago. That's Breckenridge, Keystone area, west of Denver, about an hour and a half. We live at about 9,500 feet above sea level. So some parts of Breckenridge and other parts of the county are higher. But we're kind of way up here in sort of like hippie mountain town. It's not a suburb of Denver or anything like that. An area that has only 4% of the local population calling themselves evangelical Christians. So we moved up here to a crazy mission field. My husband, Eric, is also an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God. He's amazing. He's kind of our recruiter, and I'm going to use him as a really great example of an evangelist later when we talk about the fivefold. And we just launched the church a year and a half ago. It was last March. So we started into what we call the public space. We wouldn't say the church was born then or anything like that. We just kind of opened it up and let the community know that we were here. We have 3 little ones. Our son Cadence is 6.5 and analytical teacher sort. Our daughter Aspen just turned 5, and she is without a doubt an apostle, first and foremost, which keeps us on our toes. And Chase, the little one we haven't quite figured out yet, he's 3. He just turned 3. I have some ideas, but I'm going to wait a little bit until I kind of see what else comes out of his personality. But he's just kind of running circles around his older brother and sister right now. So right about the time I started leading a church plant, we started having kids. And it's been quite a journey because we believe in being a family on mission, not someone who's separating our family from it, and not someone who's choosing the mission over our family, but actually daily taking our family with us as we go on mission in this particular place. And so it makes sense that God would have led us that way. It's a little chaotic sometimes, but my husband's unbelievable. So we get to do the co-parenting thing. We switch back and forth a lot, and it's worked out for us well. So that's
awesome. So Equip Her Women, you can see why I love her already, because she is a woman on fire for God, and she incorporates God into every part of her life. I love that, how you said he's not segmented. He's not a Sunday thing. He's not a Wednesday thing. He's not a 9 to 5 thing. He's an every minute of the day part of your life, and you're on mission with your family. I also, this month in Equip Her Groups, we're talking about what it means to be called, and our assignment for the women was to take the fivefold ministry survey, and how you spoke of your children, of having those innate gifts of apostle, your husband evangelist, and even the little one, like, I'm watching to see, like, who is he gonna be? Like, he's created uniquely by the hands of God, and with those gifts, and we're gonna talk about that today, because you that are watching right now and listening, you are as well. And it's exciting if you don't know to find out and jump in. So I know that you said don't talk a lot about me because you want to talk about the giftings of other people. And so we will. Your church really, like you said, just recently moved to a building. The thing that awed me is that you really worked as far as like groups, like the Church of Acts, like you met for over coffee, or you met people in Starbucks, or you met for a meal. So that's really how before you formed your church was like Equip Her groups, except they had men and women. And so I love that. And then each person, they didn't disciple. You really taught me, it was like, we're not making disciples of each other. We're making disciples of other people. Like that's our role from the time we become Christians, is God gives that to us. So don't bury that treasure that God has given us. Like go out and invite, like high invite, and then high invite and high challenge. That's what you called it. So I'm going to let you talk a little bit about that, like how you do that.
Yeah, we see the church falling into a few different spaces. And so public space, which is where we have a gathering, or where a lot of people call it their service, is really good for some things. It's great for celebration. It's great for bringing people together. It's great for a certain level of anonymity when people just want to see what this thing is about. But it doesn't do discipleship well. It doesn't do mission well. It doesn't do family well. And it's not supposed to. So what we've done is kind of filter into other spaces too that do that very well. And so we do discipleship huddles, we call them. They're 10 people or less. A lot of people would think of them like a small group, but not exactly. They're pretty exclusive. And by that, I mean, when we start a 9-month to a year cycle of that, nobody joins after it starts. Nobody else comes. You don't bring your sister-in-law who's in town, because there's a lot of confidentiality formed in that. And that's really where we see high invitation and high challenge, like you're talking about. We see people giving a lot of grace to each other. That's the invitational side, is the way Jesus could give worth to people. He could give value to people in a split second. In a very quick meeting, people felt valued by him. The holiest man who'd ever lived, more than the religious leaders, kind of oozed out of him this sort of like, I'm here for you. I will support you. I will give you the grace you need. I will, do all this for you. And he gives safety in that. On the other side is the high challenge part that we see Jesus very often turning around, and it's almost like he turns around and is like, we've got thousands of people following us. Time to say something really hard. He had a very high level of what discipleship looks like. To be a disciple means to make disciples. In rabbinic culture, there is no way you could actually be a disciple without making more disciples. For rabbis, we don't get that. We think we can just follow Jesus and not make disciples, but that's not even in the word. Like, that's not even part of the definition. So he was consistently trying to show people what it looked like to spread the kingdom of God through discipleship. And so sometimes the disciples would be like, you're kind of like ticking people off. Like he didn't know what he was doing. He said, yeah, this is the cost of discipleship, is that sometimes you have to hear hard things. And if you can hear hard things in the safety of invitation, when you can do invitation and challenge well, we call it just calibrating it all the time. This is how we do discipleship. 1 second, Jesus is saying, Peter, you're amazing. You just heard this from God. You're the little rock and I'm the big rock. And, he's giving him a new name and he's inviting him into this crazy covenant type of thing. And 16 seconds later, he's saying, get behind me, Satan. You're not thinking in the right way. In Matthew 16, we see that. And he does that with the disciples back and forth, whether they're the multitudes or his close disciples, he challenges them. And so that's what we do in huddles. We bring that level up high. We ask, what is God saying to you? What are you going to do about it every week? And then the next week we come back and say, so did you do what you were supposed to do this week? So it's sort of a consistent moving along of a disciple. We've seen people grow from knowing almost nothing about Jesus to being solid disciples, sometimes even leaders in a year of going through this process. It's amazing, the kind of transformation. When you actually just challenge people to think, can you hear God? Let me show you how to, that was it right there. That argument that you had with your spouse and that same insecurity came up again. That's we call it kairos. It's just the Greek word for a moment. So we do that in our discipleship huddles. And then we have an in-between space called social space, we call it, where extended family functions well, that we do missional communities in. And that's where we find family and mission works best. And so family doesn't work best 10 people and less. It doesn't work best 70 people or more. It works best like my extended family from Alabama, when we would get together for Thanksgiving, there'd be 50 people in my grandparents' little country house. That's family. You know, it's not that everybody is super intimate. That's not the point of it. That's what we have huddles for. The idea is that that's the perfect size to do mission together in oikos, which is the Greek word for extended family households. So we see those types of things fitting those. Now we have things all the time that meet other needs, like a couple small group or something that we fit in all the gaps. But for us, the way that I think we're trying to be very intentional in how I lead this church is a bit of an architect to sit back and say, okay, who does what well? How do I arrange people? How do I develop people into that? And then what space does that really need to fit in? Is this really a discipleship issue? Then let's kick it over to what we're doing here. If it's just like people need family right now because everybody moves up here to the mountains, nobody has family, then let's get them engrossed in this kind of extended family missional atmosphere. So every missional community has a specific missional focus. It takes some pressure off of us having to do everything in the community as a church, as a big church. We just decide who we want to serve and we kind of go after it. So yeah, so we see invitation happening and challenge happening in a lot of ways, but really when we get to the nitty gritty, nobody's going to look at another dude and say, so did you look at porn this week? Like right after service, you don't do that during greeting time. You do that in an environment that's safe and confidential and where people have proven that they're going to be there for each other and extend grace, but not allow each other to stay. And we keep moving. We say a lot of times, being a disciple, even being a leader is not about being a perfect example. It's about being a living example. So we just kind of help each other move to the next step of where we're going, whatever that looks like.
I love that. I'm writing that down. It's not about being a perfect example. It's about being a living example. That's beautiful. Okay. So tell me about, you have a philosophy of up, in, and out. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us? Share how that works.
Yeah, we just kind of call it the triangle. So up is about our relationship with God. And so that incorporates both the individual side of our relationship with God, so my personal time with the Lord, my personal abiding times, all that stuff, and the corporate side too. So there is something biblical about getting together and experiencing God's presence together, right? So whether that's an online community or it's getting together at church on Sunday or whatever, it's powerful, praying with other believers, stuff like that. Then we have the in dimension, which is all about how we take care of each other inside the body. And that's really how we do discipleship to one another. And a lot of that happens in huddles or it happens at coffee meetings or whatever. It's where we really find that anchor, that stability. And okay, in just a minute, I'm going to lean way out into a missional field. Every time I walk outside of this place where 96% of people don't know Christ. So I have to have that anchor of accountability and of people asking me questions and of friendship, where I know that I don't have to put up filters and I don't have to have disclaimers and I don't have to translate. And then we have the out dimension, which is where we have relationships with the world. And we see that in our community too, where it's individual and it's corporate. So we have times that as a church, people will know Elements Church as the people who give school supplies or the people who are helping Dillon Valley Elementary with their painting project or whatever. But we also are trying to teach people, and this is probably where my husband comes in the most, but really where our niche in the body has been, which is to teach people individually how to make disciples from people who don't know Christ. Mm-hmm. And to us, we don't break it down anymore. I've taken so many classes on like pre-evangelism, post-evangelism, leadership. We just call it all of discipleship, because discipleship is all about saying, I'm going there, come with me. That's it. Mm-hmm. Andrew goes to Simon Peter and he says, hey, I think we found the Messiah. You want to come see? And that's discipleship. So we make it really complicated, but really when it comes down to it, if I'm going someplace worth someone else coming with me and invite them along close enough, I make my life accessible as I'm doing that. That's called discipleship. So as we're doing that to the world, we can do that long before they come to know Christ. In fact, Jesus was discipling the disciples. They were called his disciples before they ever knew he was the Messiah. So that's kind of our, what we usually inject into the body at large. Here we're trying to do up in and out altogether, because to be a church means that we do all those things. I think there are probably some, you look at something like IHOP, like International House of Prayer, and it's primarily an up dimension of that, but they're not really trying to do in and out very well. It's not the point of it, but you also probably wouldn't call it a church, because all those dimensions kind of have to be in there. It's the same with a lot of different ministries that are happening. As a church, it's our responsibility to do all of those things and to do them as well as we can. So we use that language daily. Someone will sit down and say, man, I feel super worn out. I've got all these great relationships with my coworkers who are not believers, blah, blah, blah. And I'll say, how's your end time? Which means, it's a signal, it's vocabulary that just means, are you spending time with people who know Christ and who can ground you and who could just talk to you about this and pray with you and grieve with you through this thing you're going through, whatever. How's your uptime? How's your abiding time with the Lord? In a very missional context like this, we can get those things off really easily because the out is just so loud all the time. And we're all kind of, we know that when we come into this environment. So we've actually even broken our leadership team. We don't have a staff that does like, this person does youth, this person does children's. We have an up team, an in team, and an out team. And those people, the up team is made up primarily of people who are prophets or either in a phase of that, or they love to not only pray, but to figure out how our church can become stronger corporately and individually. How do we teach people how to connect with God, how to hear from God themselves, and then how do we bring that together? So it'll come down to like vigils, which we do once a month, that are 6-hour-long prayer meetings where a different person leads each hour. So it's super diverse and cool. And that's just because someone's brainstorming, how do we do up better? And then our in team is basically pastoral care. It's made up of pastors and teachers who love the body, love the church, and are constant. And they actually last night did a whole thing for me for Pastors Appreciation Day. So they keep up with birthdays. They do all the meals for things. They bring snacks for things. Those are things I do not think about. So it's so wonderful to have that. And then the out team is primarily made up of apostles and evangelists, people who are looking out into the kingdom, into the world. And they're constantly brainstorming ways that we can come up with either activities that we're doing together or how we train our people better to just go to their job and are disciples who are making disciples and things like that. So we've really taken it. I knew a guy once who loved this stuff so much, his board took it to how they do their finances. They would break their finances down equally to make sure that they weren't overemphasized, because most of our money is put into the gathering, into the service, honestly, as churches. And so it forced them to say, if we value these things equally, then we should be putting money into it. We should be putting our time into it. So these teams for us don't do all of those things. They just brainstorm for the rest of us how we do it together, because it's their natural, it's their unconscious competence to be thinking that way, So that's why we bring all of our gifts into the body like that too.
That's cool. So we're gonna get into the fivefold ministries, and all of our Equip Her groups have taken that survey, so they're really interested to hear your feedback. And especially, I love how you said that you apply your staff's ministry where God has placed them in ministry to what area they're going to serve in, whether it's up, in, or out. And so that's a new concept for, I would say, 99% of the world, the Christian world. So that's wonderful. But first, I wanted to ask you, what is your top ministry gift?
Yeah, apostle is my base, my strongest, most comfortable base. Prophet comes next for me, and then evangelist. It actually kind of follows the list. Evangelist is next, pastor, and then teacher is last. I have found myself in all those different phases, which we'll talk about phases in a minute, but many times. And I also find apostles often can overreach. Sometimes it takes apostles a long time to figure out where they land because they have been in all those phases, and they can kind of quickly adapt sometimes. But eventually we all snap back. We call it kind of the default setting. We can be off here, we snap back to where we're comfortable. And for me, that's always been apostle. I haven't always known that about myself. And even I will just say, it's because I'll forget the train of thought later, even with the up in and out teams, I let people choose, because even if someone their base is prophet, they may want to learn a lot about reaching people to know Christ. And so they want to be with other people who are doing that and learn something in that phase. So we don't really force that. It's just where people tend to typically go because that's what they're interested in.
That's cool. And I do want to challenge the women of our Equip groups, is that the information about each of the ministries is on the website, on the survey website, and it really does give great information about your strengths and your weakness in each ministry and how it's broken down. So I encourage you to follow up on that and read about it, because obviously Leila and I are not going to talk about every single one in that much detail, but we're going to hit on a little bit. So the fivefold ministry is for everyone, not just people in the church. And I think that is something that a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, I was actually even taught that it's not just for people in the church. It was only for vocational ministers. That's how I learned it. And I think the idea was that they're gifts for equipping the body. But if you think about it in terms of that everybody is kind of made this way, that's a gift too. So it kind of just broadens that. You're a gift, you're a gift, you're a gift. And so when we read the passage in Ephesians 4, which we have to remember is meant for a much broader audience than Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, some of the lists that we see of the things we call the spiritual gifts. There's very specific reasons Paul is writing in those environments about those things. In 1 Corinthians 12, of course, they're miraculous gifts. He's showing them how to use the supernatural well, honestly. In Romans 12, completely different context. The Jewish Christians had been kicked out of Jerusalem a while back. So it was all Gentiles who kind of had to take over their offices, if you will. And now the Jews are let back in. So the whole book is about how they work together. The whole book of Romans is written to them to say, hey, you're Jewish and you're Gentile and you don't really know how to work together, but let me show you. And so the context of Romans 12, you find a lot of different kinds of gifts, the gifts of help, the gift of administration, things like that. And that's because in that context, it was really helpful for them to know specifically, how do you lead these people together in a way that you haven't before. We come around to Ephesians 4. The letter to the Ephesians was really written to all of Asia Minor, and it was much more broadly meant for this audience. We don't see any sort of stipulations that Paul puts on that list. And so now, reading back through it, taking off everything that I've been taught really about the fivefold, I wonder how we came around to that idea that it's only for vocational ministers, especially when Paul himself wasn't a vocational minister for most of his ministry. You know what I'm saying? So like, did he stop being an apostle because he started making tents to make money? Or, I mean, you can find examples of that all over the place, that there are clearly people who are gifted in this particular way, and they don't stop being that just because they're not paid to do the job that they're doing. So I'm still not sure how we even came around to this, except maybe a little bit of misunderstanding about applying it across the board. I also believe that everybody's made this way, even if they're not believers, because again, I don't see, now he's writing to Christians, so you could say he's only talking to Christians, but at the same time, it doesn't take that much observation to really look out in the world and see samples of each of these giftings anywhere. If there's someone who's crazy entrepreneurial, who's coming up with a new business every other second, who doesn't even care that the last three that they've created have failed, but they're just going to try another one. You've got an apostle. They don't know Christ, so it's not redeemed. It's not being used for the good of the body. It's not in that way a gift to the body in the same way. But that's somebody who finds their joy and their energy in creating things and change and risk. That's an apostle. You find somebody who wants to really stand for justice, or someone who is an artist. That's a prophet. It doesn't matter. It's not God's words that they're hearing, and so in that way, it's separated from how we're living it out in the Christian faith. I mean, you could look at all the fivefold and see these beautiful examples of people, even people who don't know Christ, who God has left this imprint on in a specific, unique way. And I can find a lot of similarities between myself and people out in the business world. Sometimes a lot more readily than I can find between myself and people in the church sometimes, because I see how their apostleship is coming out in that way.
I completely agree with you. And I always compare myself. I was always an entrepreneur before I became a minister. So it makes sense that apostle is my number one. I mean, it just clearly always, creating, always wanting something new, always seeing, where there could be change. And so that was no surprise to me at all. Yeah. Brennan Manning, when you were talking about how did we come to this decision that the fivefold ministries were only for vocational ministers, Brennan Manning really hits it hard. He says that the church became scared that giving that much freedom to the people of the church might cause havoc. Like, what would we do with that freedom? We might give Jesus a bad name if we weren't perfect, right? So they started kind of stripping away the giving them any chance for leadership or for using their gifts, and that's how come people became consumers. That's his take on it. I thought it was very interesting that fear would lead us to take away people's freedom.
So true.
Their freedom in Christ. And so and that's one thing we talk about in our equip groups, is that Jesus is the one that gave you your gifts and gave you permission to use them, not man. And so often as women, we're waiting for a man to give us permission, and he already has. So we just need each other to be accountable, like you said.
Right. Yeah, that whole idea, we call it spiritual feudalism. There are lords and there are servants, there are serfs, and everybody gets something out of the deal. And we still have so much of that in American culture today. It's kind of turned more into consumerism, especially in church planting circles. It can be very much like, let me provide this amazing product for you to consume. And so we all get something out of the deal, but we're never empowered in that. And there's a great book called Empowering Missional Disciples that talks about that, talks about some of these principles. There's also a really great book that gives a little bit more extended description of each of the fivefold, before I forget, called A Permanent Revolution, or The Permanent Revolution, I can't remember, by Alan Hirsch. And he talks about them in terms, he calls it APEST, just because he turns the pastor into shepherd at the end. And he also has an assessment online somewhere, the APEST, if you search it. But I love most of the book is about apostles, and he breaks it down into Petrine apostles, Pauline apostles, how different an apostle is working inside the church than like Paul, who went outside as an apostle to the Gentiles, etc. But the whole first part of it is about the fivefold. And Mike Breen, who opened up kind of a lot of this world to me, helps write. He co-writes that first part with Ellen Hirsch. So they have a lot of similarities together in how they do that.
Because I've read his book, the discipleship book.
Building Disciple Culture.
Yeah, because you recommended that.
Yeah.
So it's a permanent revolution.
Yeah.
That's Alan Hurst. Okay.
Hirsch.
And then Hirsch. And then
HRSCH.
And then empowering missional
disciples.
And
that's by a guy by Bob Ronglien, but it's spelled kind of funny because I think it's Norwegian. So it's not how you think. It's Rognlien. Rognlien. And it's powerful. It's got all kinds of stuff.
I'll make sure that I write those down in our show notes so that the Equip Her ladies and whoever else listens to it can have those resources. So thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So next, spiritual gifts versus ministry gifts.
Yeah. So spiritual gifts, I think the Holy Spirit through Paul makes it pretty clear. God gives gifts however he wants, whenever he wants. And we especially can see that through the more miraculous gifts. Mm-hmm. So there are some like the gift of mercy that often is paired with being a pastor, or, some of those just kind of make sense because they're more intrinsic to our nature. But the fact is God can give a gift of mercy to anybody he wants at any time. So it's almost like I would see the difference in it and being like, if I'm a carpenter, that's my fivefold gift. That's who I am. I mean, it's not. Identity should never be paired with what we do, but I'm just using it as an example. That is who I am. And so if being a carpenter is my fivefold, being an apostle, then maybe I can take a tool, I can take a hammer out of my belt at any time and use it to be the better one that I can be. And that's how I see spiritual gifts. God has not given us those gifts. They do not reside within us. He just plops them down on us whenever he wants. And really the gift is for the person who's receiving it. If it's a gift of healing, it's the person who's been healed who receives that gift, not the one that God is using for that. So I think sometimes we can overdo kind of the evaluation of which spiritual gifts we have when I don't even believe we really have them. I think we might have less resistance to some than others. So if someone has used someone in the gift of healing many times, they probably will be used in that more often. But that's more the resistance that we carry in ourselves to be used by that gift than the difference in who we are or the Holy Spirit. And so, to me, I would see spiritual gifts and all those other lists as just example. And again, it's not exhaustive any more than Paul's list of sins is exhaustive in any place. He's just giving examples, right, of different things. So I feel like sometimes when we kind of grab onto those and we make them into a framework of who we are and what we do, it's not complete to start with. I do think the fivefold is pretty complete because it covers pretty much everything. And you will see, other than prophet, which I think is left out of a lot of normal assessments, on almost any personality test, the animals, the colors, choleric and sanguine, you will see the other four. I mean, I can line out the disc profile for you and show you, other than prophet, where all those other ones line up. It's pretty easy. So these are kind of things that people have looked at and see they're overarching. They're beyond gifts that he just gives at any time. They are who we are. That it does make up who we are. It makes up how we think, how we function, how I parent, how I talk to friends, the kind of person. When people look at me and say, I really respect you, that means more to me than like, you're so kind. It just does, because to an apostle, it just means more. For my husband, it would crush him if someone said, I don't know that you really love me, or I don't know that you're really putting enough relationship forward, because he's an evangelist and he's made in the way that he filters relationships so strongly through everything he does. Whereas my mind is always thinking about expansion. That's how an apostle thinks. So even in these fivefold, you will see as you get more comfortable with the base of where you are, maybe even the top two if they're pretty close, a lot of things will start to make sense over the course of your life. Oh, this is why, for me and my husband, for example, we're both pioneers. And usually the eight, we call them, apostles, prophets, and evangelists, are more pioneering gifts. And pastors and teachers are more developing gifts. So if you think about, like I look around, you could still see wagon trails sometimes up in the mountains here from where the original pioneers came through the mountains. Again, 10,000 feet up. They actually had to go up 12,000 to get over the Rocky Mountains to get to where I live now. And you think, these are crazy people. Like, these are pioneers on steroids, right? Like, these are people who came not knowing what they would find, and many of them died, and it was still worth it to try something, to expand something, to be the first ones out. Developers are the people who came along behind them and said, this is great. We've broken into new land, but we should probably educate our children. So let's build a school. We should have a postal system, so we're not riding around on horses in 2,000 years. People like that are the ones that settle us. I don't like to call them settlers because that can have a negative connotation. But really, if we think about it in terms of American history, the developers of things. So they'll say, don't give me a blank dry erase board. That stresses me out. Now, to a pioneer, that's a dream. Give me a blank dry erase board and a bouquet of dry erase markers, and I can go crazy. But to developers, they would like some structure to start with, and then they can take what you give them and develop it like crazy. And most of the fights that we've had throughout the church over time are a fight between that. So kind of what you pushed on before, most of the American church, and I can't speak for other countries, but I would be surprised if it hasn't become this way over time too, are led by developers, pastors and teachers. And so that's why it's so important that doctrine be right, and that people be cared for. But that's often where we stop, because pioneers can really blow stuff up if they're immature, right? And so we've kind of tossed the apes out of the church, and the apostles, prophets, and evangelists kind of find somewhere else to go. So you see somebody who's incredibly entrepreneurial, have all these ideas, all these ways to think past the boxes, and we stick them on like a church board. We make them a deacon or something so they can talk about money. That doesn't make any sense. Like, they should be in the thick of visionizing. Now, they may not get it right every time. You don't have to listen to everything they say, but they are going to push the church beyond where it is. And so we've really done ourselves a disservice in a lot of ways because we value safety, and that's what developers bring, which is beautiful, and we desperately need it. Because I've been in churches that are led and everything is done by pioneers, and it just blows up over time. There's a new vision every week. There's a new thing to do. People can't grasp onto it. We haven't even finished the last thing we thought of. So it makes sense that that's not the way to go either. What we really need is a blending of the fivefold in everything that we do. If we could find all of these fivefold on every team that we start, that would be awesome. I served under a guy who was a strong apostle once. I said, how do you not let like ADHD take over? And he said, well, I force myself that when I have an idea and people jump on board, and they usually will with an apostle, they'll jump on board. He said, I need to develop a team, and it needs to be primarily made up of developers. And they need to be as passionate about it as I am before I'm allowed to go into the next idea. And so that's an example of how well we can work together, because developers can often feel taken for granted. Because it's like, I have all these great ideas, you go do them. So that's not where we want to get. We don't want to just be using people for things. We want to be empowering people in what they love to do. And so that's just kind of an example of how those things work together too.
That's good. Okay, so to summarize, for anybody who's taking notes, if you are an apostle, prophet, or evangelist, you fall into the pioneering category, like you're making a way. And then for developer, if you're a pastor or a teacher, you're the developer, so you value safety, whereas pioneers value change or forward-thinking vision. Can blow things up. I love that. Can blow things up. I have, as one of my strengths is activators, so that makes sense, because activators tend to throw a lot of darts at things without even aiming sometimes. And that could be the weakness of an activator or a prophet as well, is, oh, that looks awesome, that bullseye out there.
Yeah. And I love strength finders. I love pairing with the fivefold because you have 34 of them. It's not as restricting. Activators number 2 for me too. Command. Those are like typical strategic, activator, command in my top 3. And so those are typical kind of apostle things. But you start to look at those 34 and you see all the different shades of all these different 5. There's just 5 of these. It's beautiful. But you're right. That's kind of the way we lay it out. And then if you look at it if you put it on top of the triangle too, what I said before, the prophets who are drawing from God all the time. And that's the way they're pioneering. They're always listening to God, but they're always ready to go out into a new area. They're the first ones that will try to express something that's not been expressed before. That's what I love about prophets. The in people are always the pastors and teachers, because they're the ones who naturally are the ones saying, what about the people in the church? Like, how do we care for these people more? And we desperately need those people, or we're just going to keep bringing people in and they're not going to have a place to go, right? Like we're going to get people into the church or saved, and then they're not going to have a community to be a part of. So those in people are beautiful, but the pastors are more on the people-oriented side for in. And the teachers are more on the task-oriented side. So we see teachers trying to download structure and put things in a way that will make sense and that will last a long time beyond them. And we see pastors caring for people in that kind of on the disc profile, that steady way, right? Like that high S. Like the evangelist will be the one who walks in the room and like 15 people are around them, but the pastor will be sitting in the corner with the 1 or 2 that nobody else is paying attention to. And so then on the out dimension, we see the apostles and evangelists. the evangelist on the people-oriented side, right? So when I even when I say pioneering, in a lot of ways, my husband, he's not thinking strategy all the time or like launching out into new things, but he's always looking for new people. He's always looking for new environments to reach into. He'll think to himself, and we do everything based on what we call person of peace strategy. So someone who welcomes you, invites you, they can open up entire doors in the community. You see it in Lydia and Acts. And Jesus, that was his way of doing it. So an evangelist will always be looking for those people in that way where they can pioneer. Whereas an apostle is usually more on the task-oriented side. We'll see like projects, or they will see people, but in the context of the broader vision. And that's why sometimes we can use people, right? Or step on people, because we're not always caring for them in the midst of it without that balance with the rest of the fivefold. So this is why apostles can really just step on people to get the mission accomplished if they're not careful. But we don't have to be that way. We just have to be balanced by those other ones. So in that way, more task-oriented, like I'd love to move you from here to here. And it's really because I care about you. I want to see you grow, but sometimes I can not be a great listener, right? So there's pros and cons, shadows and strengths. We call them, highs and basements to all these different kinds of gifts. But that's where we typically see them when they're most comfortable. So if we look at a church that's very, very weak and out, we need to be asking, are we empowering apostles and evangelists? Because a lot of them have taken off. They're doing pioneering things outside the church because nobody will let them do it inside the church. Yeah, it's going to be messy, right, when they do it. But so things like that, we can that's the way I'm always praying toward the fivefold. I always know where we're weak, and we're praying into that. I don't recruit people based on that, but I'm praying like, we really need a couple more prophets to show up and to ground us in some of this stuff. The evangelists won't understand them, and they won't understand them, right? Because we think so differently, but we need them. And we need to be listening to each other.
Yeah, we can't be afraid of people being different than us.
Right.
And I think it's offense is really like the bane of Satan. Wasn't that a book? I need to reread it.
Right.
So that's so good. That's so good. Thank you. I'm just trying to think what we were going to talk about, the difference between base and phase ministry. A lot of the women, so we had our equip group last night. I have an online group. And so we went over our fivefold, and a lot of the women said, well, my numbers were so close. So one woman even had like, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. I mean, literally in a row. And she's like, how do I even know which one, is the strongest? And it wasn't that the top one she didn't feel was the strongest. She just thought, how come they're so close? So what is your advice about that?
Yeah, so one thing to keep in mind is the assessment. So any kind of assessment tells you more about yourself, but you have to know a lot about yourself to take it, right? Otherwise, we end up answering questions the wrong way. And sometimes we answer questions because we feel like one thing is more valuable than another. And something like this fivefold assessment, nothing is more valuable than anything else. So if you read a question that says like, I don't really care for people very well, and you think, oh, I should get better at that. And you say, no, I always care for people well, but you really don't. You're going to miss out on the fact that you could be an apostle instead of a pastor, right? But because we value, especially for women, we value the nurturing parts of the fivefold so much more. We're told that we're all built the same way and all this stuff. We're told that so often that sometimes we can actually kind of screw up the results of that test because we don't actually know ourselves and we're not completely comfortable. And maybe we're getting closer to that, and so we'll inch our way into it. So you might find you have to take the assessment again and again over the course of a few years to really see, okay, I've become more comfortable with the fact that I'm a high challenge person naturally. Apostles, prophets, and teachers are typically more high challenge people. Evangelists and pastors are typically more high invitational people because they're more people, right? So if I feel like, oh, that's not like Jesus to be high challenge, then I'm not going to answer those questions the right way. But as I start to grasp like, hey, wait, my high challenge, when it's invitational, when I'm balancing it, it's actually a real gift to the body. And so that's not less valuable than something else. And I answer those questions right. So every once in a while that can be a factor. And it probably isn't swaying any of the ladies a ton, but maybe enough that it's filling in gaps there. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you're going through a very heavy phase, or you have traditionally been in phases of other things than your base, that's going to show up higher than it should on that test. Because let me just give you an example. We are in a county where most people aren't Christian, and that's putting it mildly. So when we showed up here, we did not feel like the first thing we should do is set up a service and start all the thing. We felt like we should go indigenous and learn about people and really become missionaries. And so for the first several years we were here, there was no place for my apostle, no place for my prophet, practically. It was all evangelist. And so for years, I thought I was an evangelist because I was in such a heavy evangelist phase. where I had to grow so much. And this has been valuable to me in 1,000 different ways. Even as I've kind of settled back into my base, I grew so much in meeting people at a point of, I hate Christians, I hate church, why are you here again? Like, at learning how to have those conversations, that I actually thought that was where I was gifted the most. My husband is a very strong evangelist. So what helped me was being able to put us side by side and say, okay, wait, we're both pioneers, we're both out people, but there's some massive differences in how we lead and how we connect with people. My husband is such that if he goes out for groceries, he'll come back with somebody, at our house. So I've had to learn to live with an evangelist like that. But it's helped me over time to see, wow, I was just in a really heavy phase. Once I get into a place where I really can do anything I want, and as a lead of anything, you can kind of dream the way that you want to, I realized I'm not a developer at all. I've just been in so many contexts where there was a strong sort of pioneer that I worked alongside. And because I can develop, I always got stuck with those jobs. And so over time, I learned about myself. I don't mind developing things if I have to, but the grace will wear off. And here's the deal with the phase. God will lead us into phases for one of two reasons. The first one will be because he wants to grow us as a person. So remember, this whole passage is about being raised up into the full unity, the full maturity of Christ. So sometimes he'll say, so we see a really immature person who says something like, well, I'm a prophet. I don't have to care about what people think. I just have to deliver the message. Like, that's not really too mature. I don't think Jesus would say that. Now, you're going to probably deliver it in a different way than a pastor would, but we still have to love for each other. We have to care for each other. So not everybody is apostolic, but everybody has to take risks and step out and be sent. Right? Not everybody's a prophet, but everybody has to hear from God and speak the word when he tells us. Not everybody's an evangelist, but we're all supposed to be reaching out. Not everybody's a pastor, but we all have to care for each other. Not everybody's a teacher, but we should all care that the truth is uncovered and sort of incarnated into our lives, right? So God will take us into phases to help us learn those things, even though he knows I'm never going to be a full-on evangelist. That's not how he made me. It's not who I've been since I was a little girl, but I can be a stronger apostle by having that phase and having that care for people and watching out. I've learned a lot of skills over the years now and how to develop, how to look for people of peace, how to connect with people that I don't know that I never would have had before if I hadn't been in that phase. So that's the first reason he'll do it. The second reason is just to meet a need. And as church planters, we see this a lot. We just have a need. So if you have time and you can serve, come serve, even if it's not where you're where your base is. Again, this makes us a little more mature and brings us past the point of that's not really my thing. That's not where I feel unbelievable, indescribable joy every second, right? Well, sometimes that's not what being in the church is about. That's not what being a leader is about almost ever. And so there's one particular young woman I'm thinking of that I asked her to lead our kids ministry, and she led it for almost a year. And it was a lot of organization and printing off curriculums and organizing. And she is not a detailed person. She is a pastor prophet. So details and tasks are way down on her list. And so she did it, and she did it well. And she did it with all her heart for 9 months. And then I was like, I promise you, I will find someone else, because the grace starts to wear off when we're in a phase. Gratefully, it wasn't her whole job. It was just something she did on the side because she was finding a place for those other two things by leading a huddle and by caring for people and things like that. So there is a place that I feel like as a leader, and again, my mind is always thinking strategically in any instance. I'm looking at people, I'm thinking, thank you so much for taking that over. I know it's not your base though, so the grace will wear off. So let's find someone to take that over for you. So it helps us to not be left in a place where someone just quits. I quit because it's not where I'm finding energy at all. And I've known that from the beginning, but I've done this to help. We don't get ourselves in that bind very often because we know ahead of time you're filling a need here, but it's really not going to last forever. So that's the thing with phases. And you might find that a phase has kind of, if you're really in a heavy phase of something right now, or you have been, say you've always been in pastoral care, but that's not really what you want to be doing, that pastor thing will come up higher than really what it should on that test when you settle back into your base. And that's why it's really helpful sometimes to kind of not offset this test, but is to just ask people around you, what do you see in me? Am I high challenge? Am I high invitation? Naturally. Now we're all a blend, and we should all be able to do both of those things decently well if we're mature. But there's a place that my mind snaps to. My mind always snaps to, how do I move somebody beyond this? How do I challenge them to get past this? That's a challenge thing. It's not, how do I make them feel loved? How do I provide harmony here? That's not ever, that's never what's on my mind. Harmony, everybody get along. That's never it. My thing is usually prod and poke until that thing comes to the surface so we can deal with it. That's command on the Strength Finders thing. And that gets us to unity in just a different way than the other thing does. So often we can talk to people, we can say, where have you seen me over the course of my entire life? When I feel most at home, most energized. And then when you put it alongside this test, it'll help you kind of sift through maybe some of those things that have picked up on something that's not really where your base is. If that makes sense.
That's really good. I'm writing that down. We're going to do strength finders next month.
Awesome.
For our group. So that'll be a good question. And we have invite and challenge questions.
Good.
And so I'll have them ask that question to other people.
Yeah.
So basically your base is how God uniquely created you, like where you thrive when you're, like how other people would just automatically see you. Well, you are definitely have the gifts of pastoring because you care for people deeply. And then the phase ministry is you're filling a need, which really brings maturity. And each of us does need to do that. And maturity hurts. I mean, it seems like there's no way around that. That anytime I grow in my spiritual walk with God, it's painful. And I wish I could make that different. And so I feel like the base part for me is really it's like, it's a gift, it's pleasurable. And it's kind of where I'm doing the pirouettes and dancing and singing and smiling and like, I can't believe I get to do this,
Exactly.
kind of feeling.
Yeah, you find you settle into, it's kind of like being in your slippers and your robe. It's where it's comfortable. It feels like home. It's kind of like when you've been in a phase for a while, something else, and the grace is wearing off. You're like, thank God for that. Wow, I felt so much grace in the midst of that. It was, I can't believe I did that for so long though, because now I'm back. Like, I feel so at home, so comfortable. And, it's also a way that we talk about unconscious competencies. So when you're in your base, you do things that you don't even know you do, and you do well, just because that's how God made you. So someone who's a pastor is automatically a good listener, and they don't count that as a gift because everybody's a good listener, right? No, not everybody is good at that.
No.
Many of us have to be very conscious about how we do that. So that's the beauty of the blend of it, is that what I'm doing when I'm going into another phase is I am consciously working on being a better teacher or growing more in the area of a prophet or whatever. But when I settle back into apostle, it's kind of like unconscious. Now we can still grow in all those things. It's kind of like strength finders. They're not really strengths, they're talent themes. And they call them that because I could be stronger in number 8 than someone else is in their number 1 if I'm really working on it, right? But the point is I can strengthen those things, I can grow, but it's natural. It's natural things that are coming out all the time. So when you think about, as you're thinking through this test, as you're thinking through the fivefold, as you're asking people questions, when you say, what comes naturally to me? You can think through the framework of invitation challenge. You can think through the framework of pioneering and developing. You can think through the framework of up in and out. What are the things that when I'm in an environment, and it's not I'm feeling a need, because sometimes you come into a place and you're like, wow, they don't really have anybody pastory right here, or they don't really have a teacher. Maybe I should take that role. But say everything is filled. Every need is filled already. Where do you want to be? What is going to bring you energy and joy? Where are you going to feel at home and go home after the end of the day, not feeling like you had to work so hard? You might have worked really hard, but it was energizing to you because that was in the area of your strengths.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
And do you mind if I just go through real quickly, like some of the differences in them?
I do want you to. One thing I wanted to say is I had someone ask me at a retreat last weekend, okay, I'm praying and but God's not telling me what my calling is. And I said, well, you need to get busy and try different things because you will know. I mean, you will know, but you're called to just make disciples, first of all. So if you need to get a job at Starbucks and start talking to people, then get a job at Starbucks and start talking to people. But that is a really good clue of if you're feeling like you're thriving in what you're doing, you'll know. And so these assessments do give us some help and comfort. And a guideline, but I think we have to be present where we're at and conscious about our choices. We can't just go along in life like nothing's happening, because it is. We're making conscious choices, and that's a gift from God that He gave us, that we have a will to make conscious choice about what we do. So yes, that was the in closing, I wanted you to go through the differences of each of them and how they apply to our everyday life, whether I'm a mom staying at home or a CEO in the workplace or a person that wants to be in vocational ministry. How does that apply to my life?
Okay, cool. Yeah. And that is a beautiful part, because no matter what kind of job or vocation you have, you can use who you are, So an apostle is someone who loves risk, loves change, often loves leading, but they don't always find themselves in leadership. Sometimes they just find themselves behind the scenes orchestrating things, usually arrangers of things or of people. You'll find those usually pretty high. And in the end, they want expansion. They want a legacy. They want something to go beyond themselves. And so if an apostle, for example, is leading a small group, they will pretty much drive those people crazy because they want movement, like I need to see something happen here. So it's fine to do that if they have another outlet for that entrepreneurial spirit, but eventually they're gonna try to push people too fast, too hard. And so that's, leading a small group or something like that is much more of a pastoral type of phase. And so you can totally do it if you're an apostle. You will grow into it, but make sure that you have an outlet of something else. So in a family, for example, I find women all the time, I feel like any person who's a mom of like 4 or more kids and juggles it well could be a CEO of a corporation. Like I see these women who have these unbelievable skills to pull things together, to pull themes together, patterns together, strategies together. And sometimes they just do it in their home, which is beautiful when it runs well. Again, sometimes we can drive our kids crazy because they just want to play. They don't want to do this thing, or they don't want to have the strategy of the next thing. And so it's really important when I find apostles who are stay-at-home moms, for example, I'm really encouraging them. It doesn't mean that you have to work a job outside or anything, but to find some place to let those things settle, where the people in our immediate sphere are not bearing the brunt of our push all the time. There's really beautiful ways apostles are typically fierce. That's how they're described. When you say something like, you got to get out there and try stuff, that's an apostle talking. Because to an apostle, you can't learn until you're already in the middle of doing it. And if you fail at it, sweet, I just learned something. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody enjoys failure, but apostles are more at home with it. For a prophet, and so in the business sense, or in the secular sense, we can see apostles being entrepreneurs, or really anybody who's creating something new, people who are pulling together strategies and things like that. For a prophet, their overarching concern always is, are we hearing from God? Are we staying close to God? Are we being faithful to the covenant that we have with God? So they're always calling people, anybody, back to that covenant. And a lot of times there's 2 different ways that we see it come out in prophets. Either they're super artistic, like I said, and if you look at the Old Testament prophets, you can see this crazy expression always coming out. It's not enough for a prophet to say something. They need to express it through their body, or through their, I believe it was Isaiah who went around naked for 3 years. 3 years. It's not like it's like 3 years, to express something that God was saying. They're very expressive sometimes in the arts. But you also find this kind of other type of prophet, and sometimes they are both, but who are very justice oriented. They're kind of living in the gap between the way the world is and the way it should be. And so you see these people starting, Bono, I'm pretty sure, is a prophet. He's not only expressive and artistic, but he's, building wells for people overseas. They're always the one calling us to justice. They're the ones that say, this is not right. And they're usually the ones standing on the side of the oppressed. So you'll see, even with some of the things that have been happening with our country in the last few months, it's all the people who are going to the oppressed side, the people who don't have a voice. A lot of those people are prophets. It's not that everybody doesn't need to be heard. It's that they can't handle these people not being heard, because there's no other way for them to be heard, right? So you see this coming out all the time. And prophets, you'll see their voice coming out in justice, in writing or speaking things that nobody else is saying, challenging the status quo all the time. So even even in the context of, say you have a college campus, a university, you look at all the professors, you might say they're all teachers, but I guarantee you there's at least 1 or 2 who are the prophets who are speaking out against stuff, right? They're the ones that are always making waves and always shaking stuff up. Whether they're redeemed or not, they're speaking about things that matter. And they're calling everybody else to look at, they're saying again and again, look at this, hear this, hear this. I will not get off of this until you turn around and look at it. And that's why they drive us crazy, but that's why we need them. The difference between apostles and prophets is that apostles will look at a whole forest, and prophets usually look at one tree until the tree is taken care of, and then they move on to the next. And that's why they're so powerful together, because apostles sometimes can get really distracted by all the ideas and the things coming through their brain. But if they're paired with a prophet who'll say, yeah, these are all distractions, that's the one, that's the next one. They're all good ideas, but that's the next one. Beautiful, beautiful way that they work out. The evangelist is a people person. And let me give you the slogans for this first 2, because the slogan for an apostle is onward and upward. I got this from the Permanent Revolution. Onward and upward, that's always their call. Let's go further, let's go deeper. For the prophet, it's repent and believe. Like, let's get down to business with this God thing. No more fooling around, no more, why are you laughing? Stop having fun. We're supposed to be intense, everything's supposed to be serious. For the evangelist, it's join the party. Everybody's invited. These are your includers, the people who are always standing at the door in church looking out, right? Saying, man, if I actually invited my friend, they would not understand what you just said. You know, we got to have our language, but my husband drives me nuts with this because, you know, even how low to put the lights during worship. I mean, we argue about this because I'm like, my second thing is prophet. I want to dig into the presence of, I mean, I want to look out, but once we're in the presence of God, let's make it a good experience for everybody. And he's always like, but if somebody walks in, like, that's always the way he thinks. For an evangelist, it's always about including more people. They're usually extroverts, which means not necessarily that they always have to be crazy friendly, but that they are energized by being with people. And eventually they will become drained by being alone, whereas apostles and prophets are the opposite, often. Now, it depends on the blend of these five. So sometimes an evangelist, you'll find an evangelist who's not an extrovert, but that's usually because teacher or apostle or prophet's right beside that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the blend of it too. So the evangelist is always looking outward, always asking, whereas I said before, the pastors and teachers are always like, what about the people inside? The evangelist is always saying, what about the people outside? Mm-hmm. And they're always selling stuff. They're great recruiters. They're great salesmen. They're people who are in sales and love it because when they found something they like, they want to sell everybody else on it. Mm-hmm. And this impacts the kingdom of God drastically, right? Because once we found Jesus, your evangelists are the ones who are going out. Now, sometimes they can go out without the safety of the body, and that's where they get themselves into trouble. And so when we see evangelists on the outer rim, we really need to pull them in. And we need to let them be kind of those woo people, like on the Strength Finders, as winning others over, and pull them into the body and allow the pastors and teachers to bring them in and really bring and disciple them so that that's not, the burden's not on the evangelist, because what they're really great at is wooing people. They want to go back out and win more people over. So when we're all working together, we can see these things happen where we're growing, but we're really excited about what we're doing. And so for evangelists, you'll see them as marketers, politicians, you know, in the world, you'll see them as people who can sell people on things. They can even manipulate people if they want to, because they understand people so well. They're usually the people who are kind of on the cutting edge of what's happening in culture, because they're getting really close. They're very close to people who don't know Christ. They're listening a lot, and they're bringing back those messages to the church. Unfortunately, a lot of times the church doesn't want to hear it, you know, because it threatens our safety. So that is a beautiful thing. If you find yourself always wanting to be with people, always asking those questions about who knows Christ and who doesn't on that people-oriented side, you're probably an evangelist.
Cool.
The pastor, the slogan is love one another. So the pastor really is that nurturing kind of person. And we never want to put these in terms of the titles that we put on people. Even for evangelists, most of the way that I saw an evangelist growing up in a holiness church in the South, those were really prophets. Those were people, you know, they were calling people to something. They weren't the people that wanted to hang out with people like nonstop. Like my husband could live in a commune. He's such a strong extrovert. That's not what we've typically named as evangelists in the past. So we don't want to get hung up on those things. Same thing with the pastor. The pastor is not, in the Bible, it's not someone who's in leadership. It's someone who nurtures and shepherds people. So because we only use that one term, I mean, I don't think I would be looked highly upon to call myself Apostle Leila. So I call myself Pastor Leila because that's a title that we have. But pastor is toward the bottom for me. So that means the person who is nurturing all the time, the person who is shepherding, the person who is bringing in people that no one else is really caring about. Like I've seen this before. There's a young woman who's part of our leadership now who wanted to be a special needs teacher, but she eventually changed to be a geriatric nurse. Now that's like as classic pastors you can get, because those are two groups of people that nobody wants to be with. Nobody wants to wait for, nobody wants to spend time with. It's like some of the pioneers were moving so fast that we don't have time to scoop up some of those people that the pastor will naturally scoop up. They will be looking back saying, hey, wait for these guys. They will get there eventually. And so that's why it's so powerful to have pastors really helping with that part, to say, don't move on quite yet. We can get a couple more people on board. And so they are often teachers, even though I know there's a teacher version. There are people that work with small children, or just people who are disabled, or, you know, anybody who sees those people and wants to work with them. They're counselors. Many of them are pastors, and often are content and happy to pastor a smaller church, or a church that's led through small groups or something like that, where they can deal with people just one-on-one in their pain. They help grieving people, all this stuff. And you'll see as you read through that thing, there are downsides to each of these, of course. So sometimes pastors can have a hard time letting people go, you know, really understanding like these are the people that God's given me and not those people's. How do I make the distinction? They have a really hard time with that. Apostles can come along and help them sometimes with that. Like, yeah, these are not people of peace for you. Let it go and let someone else disciple them. The teacher, the slogan is pursue truth. And so sometimes I feel like the teacher, people can't understand. This is the one that I find the most when people take this test. They're like, that's weird. I don't enjoy communicating, or something like that, right? So I almost feel like it should be phrased more like learner or understander. Because even if a teacher is the type of person who doesn't actually want to teach anybody anything, they're consumed with being able to understand, to put things into systems. This is why I find engineers are often teachers, because they like systems of things, right? Like they like order. They want to put things where they belong. They might want to be super practical with it and do all the other stuff with it too, but they want to understand their world. And so teachers are always asking, how do we, okay, all of this that you guys are saying is really great, but how do we bring it down to a level that we can communicate? A really matured teacher will be able to take really profound ideas and break them down into very simple ways that anybody could understand. Because again, they're developers, so they want to make sure that nobody's left behind. Now, again, sometimes with teachers, they can lack urgency. We don't have all the answers. So if we're going to wait around for all the answers, we're never going to move. So this is why pioneers and developers work well together. But they are amazing at boiling this stuff down, helping people understand it. And I found in my context, being able to say, hey, I know that you can find whatever you need anywhere. And you've learned, maybe it's through Bible college and seminary, or it's just through being a very self-starter initiator type. But these people really need more teaching on this. Even like women in ministry, like I just try to normalize it everywhere I go. And I've forgotten that sometimes, oh wait, yeah, we should talk about the scriptures. Like we should do some training on this. It's the teachers who are always coming out and saying, I love all this stuff, but they don't understand it. So it's beautiful when you see all these people come together. They can be either very conceptual sorts. I find a lot of teachers in like, I don't know, seminaries and stuff where it's like, let's talk about if another letter from Paul were discovered, That's one type, very conceptual, don't mind people coming against their thoughts and their values because let's think it over, like who knows, open-minded. And then you've got another kind of teacher who's very stable. And it's almost like if you challenge something that's part of the doctrine, it's almost like taking a brick out from the bottom, and they can become very nervous when people come around and start challenging those things. And so those are the most stable kind of developer types that I've seen, and we need all of them. We do. But there's a couple here that he's the first kind of teacher and she's the second. And the way they talk about things and the way they even argue with each other is kind of cool to watch, because it's just the differences. It's the just unbelievably beautiful diversity in the body that God's put in us to challenge each other in those ways. And so they both walk away, if they do it respectfully, with a new perspective of things, right? Both teachers, but just very different kinds. So.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. What was the motto for the teacher?
Pursue truth. They always want to know what the truth is. They're usually the fact checkers. If somebody's like, I don't know, it was either like 14% or 40%, you'll hear them in the back say, it's 40. I just looked it up. Like they can't handle. And so a lot of other people, it's like, these are details that don't matter, but they matter to the teacher. And this is why we have scholarly works and commentaries and Bible dictionaries, because someone cared enough. Now, some of us, we just fly past it and we're like, And I've also seen teachers, they can lack empathy. They might be sitting down with someone and they'll say, I don't remember, this is what's happening, sobbing, and they're like, no, it was Tuesday. It was Tuesday. It wasn't Thursday. Like, the person is sobbing in front of you. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Tuesday or Thursday. But often that's what they have to check themselves, and it has to become a conscious competence to not always be looking for the answer, not always be looking for who's right and who's wrong, that type of thing for a teacher. But they're very, very valuable when they come in. And so when we could see all these different fivefold ministries working together, all the gaps are filled, because we're always going to be looking out. We're always going to be taking new ground. We're always going to be listening to God and implementing what he says. It's not the prophet's job to interpret and apply the word of God. It's just the prophet's job to bring it to the body, right? So when they're out by themselves, they're crazy people. But when they bring it into the body, and they can be tempered by, okay, I know that's what you said, but that's the kernel of revelation. Let us interpret it and apply it. We don't have to be quite as scared of them as we have been in the past, because it's not their job to do all that. Now, they might have been taught over time that is their job, and so we have to train people who come in like, you just get to bring it to us and I get to decide how I want to apply that word, right? But they've just not been trained on that, because they've been sent off to IHOP. Every time a prophet appears, they end up at IHOP because they're welcome there. And they're so different. They're so other than that a lot of times we can't wrap our heads around it. So you'll see this beautiful interaction. An evangelist will look at a prophet and be like, I'm not letting you near any of my unbelieving friends, because you just say something crazy. And I've been developing this relationship for 2 years. But I've seen sometimes the prophet is the one who brings them to Jesus. I mean, it's just when we help each other understand who we are and what we bring to the table and what we don't, and then we release the rest to God, it's amazing what he could do. We're not put in boxes by this stuff. He never wants us. And I think that's why he gives us the spiritual gifts, because he'll say, you might be not a risk taker at all, but I'm going to put you in this place where you're going to step out and you're going to pray for this person, and you're going to hear something from God, and you're going to speak it, and it's going to change your life, right? So that we allow space for the Holy Spirit to do whatever he wants through these strengths. But in the end, the reason that I am the way that I am, and I tell you, to put language on things removes so much shame. And it brings so much understanding and so much honor in a body, especially, to say, this is why I always do that. I'm not going to push away from that anymore. I'm not going to deny that, especially to be an apostle as a woman, you know, dominant on the disc profile. That's not usually a really soft and sweet adjective to define a woman by, right? That often is paired with the B word and with things like that are not looked highly upon for a woman. To be able to look at that and say, God is so pleased with the way he made me, that he made me that way. He loves it. And then to be able to look at another woman who's a pastor by nature, to see the differences between us, and to be able to remove all judgment, all shame, and say, this is why you are the way you are. It's not because you're a woman, you're more womanly than someone else. It's because God made you that way. And to see a man who's a pastor not have any of those like wild at heart tendencies, because he's not an apostle, right? But to be able to take, see, I think John Eldredge took apostleship, but he assigned it to a gender. And that's where he kind of got that whole thing wrong, because the whole time I was reading that book, which I probably threw it against the wall like 50 times when I was reading it, but I felt like I should, because I was discipling men. You know, I've read Every Man's Battle. I've read a lot of things in discipling men. And some other time we should talk about how to disciple men and women equally, because it's been a cool journey that I don't find many people have very good tools for, honestly.
And I have sons, so,
yeah. So
I want them discipled equally.
Right. And some of them will be more, you know, and so you don't want people to think like, oh, he's all boy. What the crap does that mean? She's all girl. My daughter being an apostle, she's crazy. Like, she's crazy. She's always doing the wildest things. She's the one who's like peeing outside. She has two brothers. I'm like, who's peed out? Oh, it was my daughter. You know, it's like, she just wants to try new things. Like, her older brother does things because he sees her try them first. I've had to really encourage him, but like, look, Aspen's doing it, and he'll jump in. I'm never going to make her feel bad about how she's made because she's not nurturing, or no, she is in some ways, but not like that. And my son is much more like that. My little one is much more like that. I think he's more likely to emerge as a pastor. I'm not ever going to say, well, take risks, man. Be adventurous. This is what they say men are made to be. The fact is, if we can look at each other just based on these bases, it will help us understand each other better, rather than saying we're men, we're women, or whatever. I look at another woman who's an apostle, and we can see each other from across the room and get each other. We're both having a hard time understanding the other person who's on the opposite end of the spectrum, you know, or a man. I mean, I'm in environments all the time where I'm the only woman in the room. But as long as it's people who are kind of wired like me, I don't care. I can normalize that for people. You know, I'm not strange because I'm a woman. I'm just strange for a lot of people because I'm an apostle who's a woman. That's okay. We get to see more of that in the secular world, in the business world. And we don't get to see as much of that in the church because we're told who we're supposed to be. So as we start to kind of take away some of these other labels and these other definitions, and we start to say, oh, you are exactly who God made you to be because you're legitimately that person, then we remove shame, because shame is always hiding in some dark corner. We bring it out into the light. We say, you know what, I've always kind of been ashamed about this about myself, but now I see I've only been operating out of the shadows of this. God has strengths in this. And maybe in the past I've really been wrong with how I've operated in this, but that doesn't mean that what God put in me is wrong. It just means I need to learn how to use it well. So I need to go find an apostle who could teach me how to be mature in this. I need to go imitate someone as an evangelist who does this well and does it in a way that's a gift to the body, and not always just being the cool Christian that all the unbelievers love. They could never connect any, the power of an evangelist, so you could connect people to the body, not just that you're the cool person out there floating around. Immaturity can come out in any of these things powerfully, or maturity can. And so God has made us all, this is why I said, the good title for this is Understanding How God Made You. He made you this way. He's not displeased. He doesn't make some sort of mistake. He loves the way he's made you, and you'll always find a home around the way that he's made you. You'll always find value in that. Where we find the most power is when we all get together and we're with people who are not like us and we contribute those things. So sometimes I find myself, I need to withdraw and be with other people who are just like me. And then I need to go right back out and be with other people who are not, so that I can contribute what I have to the body. So that's the power of this up in and out thing, the balance of abiding and fruitfulness that we see in John 15, all that stuff. The power of it is sometimes I need safety, and sometimes I need to get pushed out, and I need to just be the only one in the room who's like me. And be okay with that,
I love what you said. But I think one of the things that really stuck out to me is that right now you might be the only woman in the room. I have the same experience. But there is not less women apostles in this world. It's just that we have not discovered who God created us to be. And it's because we're so enamored with what the world has told us. And also it's so pressed upon us of this is how you are supposed to be. I was at a conference last week, and a woman was giving a really high level explanation of her church. And then it was apparent the men at the table didn't understand. And she goes, well, I'm complicated. I'm a woman. Just accept it. And I went, no, actually, you're not complicated because you're a woman. You are a high level thinker. I mean, we need to have a different concept of who we are. We are made in the image of God, and we're thinking of ourselves the way that the world has said, well, no, you're this way. Mm-hmm. You're this way. No, that's not sweet enough. You can't be that. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to challenge our thinking, right? And I know I've done it. I grew up in a church where I thought it was right that I just sat back and raised kids and didn't speak. I mean, I thought that, but I didn't understand why I wanted to lead. I didn't understand why I wanted to create change and why everything bothered me. So it's praise the Lord that someone else came beside me, Jody Dietrich, and several others to show me the truth of scriptures. And then I went to school, and then I was like, wow, the truth is the truth. So, and I know that this is going to be such a gift for so many women. And the fact that we could record it and that women could see it is just a beautiful thing. And if they could be with us right now, you would know how much they appreciate it. So thank you so much. It just lights a fire in my soul. I know it does for you too.
Good. I was just going to say, I would love for you to send everybody my email address. And if anybody wants to talk about this, my cell phone number, if anybody wants to talk about this, in addition to what we've talked about here, my number 4 on Strength Finders is individualization. And I love figuring this stuff out. It's kind of like really fun.
Yeah. It's funny because I have the same as you in strengths.
So I'm like, bring it on. Oh, that's an interesting one. I'll try to kind of figure it out. And I love now, after several years of integrating this into pretty much everything that we do, being able to help people understand that's why you think that way. Your teacher side is coming out in all the engineering stuff that you do as a job. So that's why your evangelist wants to find a place in what we do as a church. It just makes sense. They're equal almost for this one young woman I'm thinking of. So anyone who wants more information or anything like that, or just wants to chat about it, wants to email about it, please send in my information. I'm not an expert on it, but I do think we've gotten to the point where it's imitatable, some of the stuff that we're doing and the way we're thinking through it. And so I'd love to be a resource.
Okay, thank you so much. And so just in closing, if you had any prayer for the women who are listening, the women of the churches, what would that be for them? What hope do you have for them?
Yeah, for me, everything comes back to identity. It all comes back to the covenant that we have and who the Father says we are. And so we're constantly in this, in this race to kind of shed what the world has said about us, what we've said about ourselves. And, Paul says, I can't even really listen to my own testimony about myself. I can only listen to God's. It doesn't even matter. There are some times that I'm thinking things about myself, and the Father says, do you really think I made you like that? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've really encouraged people to do is to say, I am, and whatever goes in that blank can only be what the Father has said. And it cannot be something based on what we do. Not even a role as important as being a mother. It really cannot define us, because if something happens to those children, or when we're done with that, who are we now? It's not what defines us. It's not who we are, any more than a job is or anything else. It can be a really important role in our lives, but a role is different than who we are. And so I even had a friend who would say, I'm such a worrier. I'm just a worrier. And I finally called her on that. I said, do you think when God created you, he made you a worrier? Not a warrior, but a warrior, And she really had to think about it. I said, here's what you're doing. On the one hand, you're being really hard on yourself, but on the other, you're letting yourself off the hook. Because if God made you as a worrier, then you don't have to stand against that when it comes. You don't have to, is that really how God made you? And so we've been in this constant kind of work, consciously saying, when I say something about myself, even if it's almost subconscious, is it true? And is it something that the Father would say is how I made me, is how he made me? So I would just pray for all the women on here. It's not just about the fivefold, that's just one piece of it, but to really sit down with the Father. And even if you can only hear one word, a lot of times the first word that God uses for women is enough. You're enough. just as how I made you, you know. But those things, you get down more specifically to say, Leila, this is who you are. This is the daughter that you'll always be, whether you're leading a church or not, whether you're in vocational ministry or not, whether you're a mom or not, whether you're all these things that we do. All of the way that he made me fleshes out through those things. But if I'm in a hidden season, an anonymous season, if I have all those things stripped away, I'm still going to be that same person that he made. And so that would be my prayer for the women who are listening to this, and everyone you guys disciple, every generation of disciples that comes from every woman who will listen to this and their lives, that we just continue to tell everybody that we disciple, male and female, you are who God made you to be. Find a home in that, find joy and purpose in that, and then grow like crazy. Risk a little bit to put who you are out there, because there is someone out there who wants it desperately. Even if the place where you're planted right now is not seeing all of those things, they are still there. Encourage them, cultivate them, because he will bring you into a place where you can use those things at some point. The apostle thing is the reason so many of us start churches, to be honest. There's just not a place for us in a lot of places, but whatever, I'll take whatever I can get. So wherever people let me, and I came to a place where it has no Christians, I can't even tell you how many challenges come with that. But the beauty of it is nobody looks at me and says a woman can't lead. I mean, you're talking about a liberal, non-Christian place where 70% of the businesses are owned by women. I don't have to, I can't even remember most of the arguments for that stuff anymore. I have to go re-educate myself. It's been so long since anyone has challenged me because I'm a woman leading in this place. So there are open doors. They're hard in some ways, but there are places. If you're an apostle, if you're a teacher, if you're an evangelist, whoever you are, find a way to do that in your life right now, to be that fully, to dive into it, to lean into it, to be joyful in it. And God will make ways wherever he does that. It may be in vocational ministry or not. I have no idea. I might find myself one day not in vocational. I don't care. That's not who I am, right? So I'll always be leading someplace. You know, I'll be driving people crazy and stirring something up everywhere I go, but it doesn't have to be in that place. So that would be my prayer for that, to dig into identity, to abide as long as you have to hear those words from the Father. And every time those other voices try to come around, to just say, you know what? I can probably learn something from some of those things, but it's not going to define me.
That's awesome. I know every woman who is listening will be encouraged by those words, and every word that you spoke today. I took amazing amounts of notes, and I will share those with everyone. So thank you. And ladies, you have not even heard really the tip of the iceberg of Leila's story. So if you are a minister who is having speakers come, I would highly recommend that you have her come and speak at your church. And so you can just hear her whole heart, her growing up, just everything. There's so much more that she could share with you. So please invite her to come speak, because she would love to share some time with your ladies. And I know I'll see you soon too. So she's going to be doing a Women in Ministry church planting cohort talk next week, I think, for our network. So pretty exciting stuff coming up. I think it's next week, isn't it?
Yes, and I'm also speaking at the START event at Northwest in like a week and a half. So
yes,
I'll be in your at the night chapel. So yeah,
good. I'm glad you said that. So if you want to come see her at Northwest, and I think that's also going to be live telecast as well. So I'll get everybody the information on our Equip page and on our Northwest Women's page as well, so you all can tap into those resources. So just a huge thank you again, my friend. And everybody who's watching, I just want you to know this is how much she loves you and believes in you, is that I called her on the fly on Friday afternoon, and now it's Monday morning. And I said, could you do this? Because you are the expert, and you will motivate women to invite and challenge them to take a step forward in what God is doing in their life. So thank you so much for being with me today and on our first On the Road with Angela Craig. So have a wonderful day.
Thank you. I will.
It's been a pleasure.
You look gorgeous, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And you do too. We'll see each other in person soon.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.